Hey, this is Frank. You're listening to an Origins episode of the Unbecoming Platypus podcast. Do you ever feel like you have friends who sometimes just don't get each other? This is a podcast that I recorded with two of my friends, Jake and Noah. We find out the hard ways we struggle to communicate better and sometimes succeed, but sometimes not. For years, the three of us have talked about communication and how it's sometimes easier said than done. Even when we're trying to be understanding, our well-meaning intentions often get lost in translation. We decided to share these conversations with the world. Join us as we find out what happens when three friends try to learn how to really talk to each other.
What did you guys do last night?
We watched the show, made some meatloaf.
Sort of binge watch the show, Breaking Bad.
Yeah, we watched the last 3 episodes to get that thing finished.
Nice. Oh, you got it finished.
Yeah.
Is Better Call Saul, is that like the sequel to that show?
Yeah, you haven't seen that?
No, have you ever watched it?
Incredibly good show.
Okay. Are you intending to watch that next?
I'm hopeful.
Is it after the events of Breaking Bad, or is it just about Saul's life? Like, is it?
At any point, does he change his name to Paul?
To Paul?
Does he get blinded?
Does he have like a,
I don't think
Jesus
it's
experience?
no,
Oh, okay.
but
I just don't know anything.
there are both parts after and before.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's interesting.
I loved Breaking Bad. I've never seen Better Call Saul before.
Do you remember at the end of Breaking Bad where he says he's at the vacuum shop or whatever, and he's like, "I'm hoping I'm a Cinnabon manager in Nebraska or something to Walt in a couple of months."
I don't remember that specific line, but
That's a
Key segue.
that's what happens next.
that's pretty cool. I've heard good things. I've just never. What's it on? What platform is it on?
Netflix.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, I watched Breaking Bad probably 10 or 12 years ago. Watched it straight through. I think I got into it during the 4th season. Are there 5 seasons? You just watched it, man.
Yeah, you literally just finished it.
I just watched it for 3 months. By pushing play on the next part.
Oh, I guess. I think there are 5 seasons.
I bet we have Google.
I have no idea what that is. I think there are 5 seasons or 4 seasons.
5. There's 5.
So I started watching the show when the 4th season was airing. So I binge watched, 1 through 4. I think the final 3 episodes of season 4 or something I, watched as they came out. And then, season 5 came out like a year later or whatever. And I don't know why, because I loved that show. I couldn't get enough of it. I could not watch it again. And I couldn't pick up season 5 just out of nowhere. Like I had to, I didn't have enough background. I had no memory of what happened.
Sure. I've never tried rewatching it, but I'm sure that I could get back into it.
I think I could now. Yeah. But like a year later, I wasn't in a place where I was.
Well, I watched Randy and Frank for 20 minutes yesterday, and I was interested. I remembered enough I even remembered that Hank got killed, which...
Don't say that.
I was surprised that
I'm going to give it away for everyone that's never watched Breaking Bad and is dying to see it.
All 2 of them.
Apologies.
They don't have access to it.
Apologies.
Yeah, my problem is that I don't know. When I have free time, I do not watch shows. And then sometimes I have the best of intentions. I jump into a show. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to watch the whole freaking thing. And then 3 episodes in, I lose steam.
I don't have any streaming services at all. I do have access to a friend's Disney Plus.
Okay.
So I don't watch that much TV, but when I am bored, I have recently restarted Alias.
Oh, yeah.
On Disney Plus.
That's weird.
Man, it's so long ago.
Yeah. I think we were, you and I went to a bar yesterday, and I looked up at a screen, and Jennifer Garner was on the screen, and I was like, "Is this Alias?" But she looks exactly the same as she did.
She
Except,
does.
you know, no purple hair or whatever.
For sure. Well, she only had purple hair. I know the episode. I just watched it.
Oh,
Episode 6, season 1.
well, it was part of the marketing for the whole show because I saw it constantly.
Yeah.
I mean, that was back when I was watching actual shows on ABC, and you know, the commercial would pop up. Was that Fox?
Ironically, that was ABC, I think. Ironically, I almost asked you out of nowhere yesterday about Lost. You watched? You watched Lost? No,
I never did.
I don't know why it popped into my head, but I was just curious. I was thinking about Lost, and it was such a good show.
Yeah,
that was one of the shows that I remember. Like, you couldn't wait for the next episode to come out the next week.
right.
And that's an experience that doesn't happen. Well, there are shows that release weekly, but people, I think, a lot of times just ignore that and then binge after they're out.
Sure. Yeah.
But back in the day, it was waiting for the next episode. And that was really big, you know, back in the Friends days.
Sure.
Like, can't wait till next week to see what happens with Ross and Rachel or whatever. It's such an interesting juxtaposition from where we're at now.
It is really interesting that, I mean, you're right. Like, you know, Netflix came along, and it was, you know, this whole idea of like binging the season really became part of the cultural consciousness, and it was just something that you did. But, you know, and then I guess over the last year or two, I've started to see, you know, the releases of episodes weekly again, even though it's on a streaming platform.
Well, we had that with Game of Thrones. We used to get together and watch that.
That's true.
And that was in the streaming era. So it does happen, but that used to be was how it happened back in the day. For everything.
It is interesting though, like thinking back to that time period of, you know, Lost and Alias and stuff, and you had 24, and I loved the idea of 24 because it was like, you know, it was actually using the format of a typical season of a TV show. You know, it utilized that and harnessed it and made it into something cool.
Jack Bauer did a lot in 24-hour period, though.
Yeah, no doubt.
Sometimes in multiple countries.
I don't know how he did it. It was insane. But I got really into 24 for a while.
Yeah.
I watched like 3 or 4 seasons.
I don't know if the multiple countries is actually true, but it seems true.
Oh, I'm sure it is. Yeah, he got there, I'm sure. Somebody was on their way to another country. Either way. I remember one season, I think that Alicia Cuthbert got, like, you know, kidnapped and taken over the border into Mexico.
Yeah, that sounds right. I like 24 a lot too when it was on.
Actually, I remember the way that I watched it was to get DVDs from the library. I would get the DVD box set.
That's such a Jake Tolbert thing.
And watch it on my compact Sario 5000. So that was the way I watched it.
That's such a Jake Tolbert thing. We check out movies from the library.
That's what we do.
Or check out CDs. You could check out CDs.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I never did CDs. I mean,
no, I'm not saying you did.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Did you know you could get books from the library too?
Yeah. I knew that part.
When I was young, we used to go to the library like twice a week. This is how I remember it anyway, but I feel like we were always at the library. And I was always renting the Star Wars VHSs to the point that, I mean, I think I wore them out. Like, you know, you knew exactly where the squiggles were going to be.
Frank and I went and got a library. Join the library. I don't know, membership.
Why didn't you invite me?
One time, he's like, after
you lived here a long time, probably already happened.
Yeah, after Frank moved here, he's like, I'm gonna go to the library, get a membership. You want to come? I was like, all right.
Gotcha.
And then, in the most Frank fashion, He got there and owed like $160
to the Decatur Public Library.
Is this part of the Rolling Prairie library system?
Yes. I don't know.
They're connected in some way, but it was the most frank thing. He got there. We like both were getting our membership taken care of, and then she's like, "Looks like you owe some money from like 2000."
Yep. Those were the debit card roulette days.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. You'd go to the library and you need a book, and they're like, "Well, you have a fine. It's like 17 cents or something." And you're like,
let's take a quick break.
you're listening to an Origins episode of the Unbecoming Platypus podcast. In these episodes, we're learning. We don't know what we're doing yet, and sometimes it shows. We think there's beauty in being a beginner, and we're learning from them, so we publish them. So thanks for listening, and rest assured that there will be better Unbecoming Platypus podcasts ahead. I just want to read this book. You know? $1.15. I can't afford it, I guess.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, I remember having like calling up Staley Credit Union and being like, "Hey, so I see that you put an overdraft fee on my account, but I mean, I replenished it like 2 hours after it overdrafted. Just curious if we could, take that $25 fee off."
Yeah.
It makes it look so much worse when it's $30 overdraft.
Right.
Yeah. Good old Kelly.
Kelly.
That's Daily Credit Union. I had her email. I just emailed her when things weren't going my way.
Kelly. I'm having a hard time.
Yeah. She removed a lot of overdraft fees in those days.
That's funny.
Kelly's very kind.
Yeah.
Yep.
Overdraft fees as a concept are kind of horrible.
Hey, you didn't have enough money to pay for this, so we're going to take more.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the beginning they weren't horrible, and they are required sort of incentive.
Oh, yeah.
As a bank, you have no viability if everyone overspends.
Sure.
Yeah, it has to be done. I mean, what else are you going to... But now it's like, go and get an account, and they're like, "Hey, do you want, $600 of overdraft insurance or whatever?"
Yeah.
I don't get that. Like, what's the point? Do they only give that to people who are never going to overdraft?
Yes.
Okay.
Probably.
Yes, that's a credit, Robert. It comes with a fee, different fee. You don't go negative. You just go into your line of credit.
Sure. That makes sense. I get that. Huh.
And then they charge you interest on that if it comes to it. Yeah.
Oh, usually instantly.
Really?
No grace period on overdraft line of credit, usually.
Interesting.
Frank, I love the robot face a lot.
You're adding the conversation we're having right now to the agenda.
Yeah.
Let me pop over here to the jam.
Trying to help us keep on track.
Filtered ketchup. I prefer salted mustard myself.
Talk about favorite shows and TV in general. What do you guys think about TV?
I think it's a great idea.
I hate it.
Big fan. So
There's a time in my life I enjoyed movies.
I can't watch movies anymore. Like,
I could.
fall asleep 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like that mostly. I do have time. When I have free time, sometimes I will go back and watch something. I watched the first 3 John Wick movies, since there's a 4th one now.
There's 4 of them?
There's one out in theaters now, I think.
Are you serious?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And I've never seen John Wick ever. And I have Google Play money that I can use. So over the course of a few weeks, I'd watched 3 John Wick movies. Lots of people die in those, man.
Yeah.
Is that the one where he goes to hell?
What kind of murderers would you say they were?
Well, I don't know. Jake would have to answer that question. Jake,
well, I thought of another type of murderer since the last time we talked.
We talked about murder yesterday. I'm sure that surprises you.
Well, we're always talking about murder around here.
I gave Jake a bunch of scenarios last night.
Oh, yeah. That was good.
I gave Jake a bunch of scenarios last night about different people killing people, and would he kill the people sort of scenario.
I forgot about that. Like, rehash that. What was... Do you remember?
I remember having a conversation.
Yeah.
I don't remember what started it exactly.
I don't remember either, but it was basically like, would you kill...
What was the question I asked you that you're like, oh, I like that question. I like that question. I like that question. Does that sound like Jake?
Especially. I did it 3 times, especially.
Yeah. I really, really enjoy it.
It's basically what
I think it was basically this idea that
it was about murder and he loved it. Okay, go ahead.
If you come across, a person who is about to stab another person, do you try to stop it without knowing anything else about what's happening?
Yeah. Well, okay, the conversation started. The conversation started. I asked Jake if he would murder someone. And I said, not for self-defense, not to protect friends or family or whatever, but just, would you murder someone?
Because you think it's cool to murder.
Yeah, well, I think I said, would you kill someone, for instance, because they're black?
Oh, right.
Okay. And he said yes. You did
very little information.
You answered yes.
I said, I feel as though this requires a little bit of information surrounding this. I said that everything in the world is symbol, and that if a person is growing up in a tribe and their tribe says, this is bear kills you. If you see bear, without discretion, you can kill bear, right? This is like the symbol for it will kill you if you don't kill it first. And there's an analog to that in society that is really at the core of a lot of systemic racism. And that is that we often would say, like, this is black person. They are dangerous. They are robbers in general. They are, these like bad sort of ideas. If this person is walking up to your house and knocking on your door, they want the worst for you. They're going to try to hurt you or something like that. If that is the symbol that your tribe passes down to you, then you believe that this thing is as dangerous as a bear, and you would shoot them because you think your life is at stake. Mm-hmm. This is the sort of symbolism that I believe, anyway, is at the heart of these cultural ideas.
And in fairness, he did say all of this last night. However, inebriated Jake answered the question yes, and then broke into it. Mm-hmm. So
we were having conversations about different morality systems.
I just thought it was fun to say that I asked him that specific question and he answered yes, which is true.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. But one of the questions, though, was like, essentially we started talking about this idea that we started talking about this idea that, the closer a relationship that you have to a person, if I walk in and I see Jessica about to stab a person, well, I know her very well. I've known her for a very long time. I'm not going to try to stop her because I'm going to assume, that she's sort of an extension of my consciousness. I know that she would not be doing this unless it was necessary in her mind.
Would you not want to stop her from the standpoint of you don't want her to have to live with having killed someone?
Potentially. I think that in that moment there is a very quick sort of decision matrix that happens. You're not going into a lot of details. It is react or don't.
This is sort of why I don't like this conversation. Because it's just always that. It's always, well, I think it's going to depend. It's going to depend. And then it just gets broader and broader and broader. And so that's why, like last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever that happened, that's why I was like, I just don't feel like this conversation is super helpful to what our topic was. Yeah. I'm not saying right in this moment, but that's why I don't love that conversation, because I agree with you. Yeah. I don't think you're wrong, but it just always gets broader, because you can always say, well, it depends. It depends on the person. Do I know the person? What's happening? You're going to make a decision in the moment. And then now all of a sudden, like, your parameters continue to widen.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, just to close it out though, the question that you asked that I thought was really interesting was something like, what if Jessica was going to kill Thatcher? And then I said, or, what if Thatcher was the one with the knife? Like, what are the different responses here based on the closeness? If this is my son, am I going to stop it? It changes based on who the person is, for sure.
Exactly.
How well you know the person.
I like, for the listeners out there, we have a Google Meet open, and all of us are different filters, are using different filters, and then Frank has been responding via emoji.
No, I'm not actually using a different filter. I actually do have that octopus sitting on my head.
Oh, okay, but Frank has just been listening to the conversation and reacting via emoji that floats onto the screen.
I thought the conversation was about emojis.
That is a moving emoji. Did you see that?
Yeah, they float onto the screen and then they float off of the screen.
Yeah, but no, I mean the thumbs up thing. Like, it started with the thumb not up, and then the thumb went up. It's an animated emoji.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. What do you guys think about emojis?
Man, that wasn't forced. We've talked.
I like them.
Here, hold on, let me respond.
That's very. You look like you're very ponderous.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's the right time for that. How are you feeling about this podcast today?
Pretty good.
Good. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that octopus hats are pretty solid.
Yeah, well, I actually look like a dragon, a baby dragon.
Yeah.
You said Spyro?
Dragon. Spyro the Dragon?
I mean, I've heard the name. I don't know what that is.
It's a PlayStation game.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is that actually Spyro, or is it just meant to look like Spyro?
It's not Spyro.
Okay.
It's just one of the only cute little dragons that I know of. I mean, Spyro is purple. But yeah, I remember I had Crash Bandicoot Warped on PlayStation, the original. And if you put in a cheat code in the menu of that game, it gave you a demo of Spyro the Dragon.
Oh, okay.
And so that's the only thing I ever played. I never actually owned Spyro the Dragon.
Gotcha. I've heard the name. I just didn't know what it was, but it makes sense.
Yeah. He's pretty cute little dragon. Snorted fire and stuff.
Yeah. Anyway,
So,
our recent conversations
have been about Slack.
have been surrounding social media, communication, branding to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And emojis are interesting. We talked a little bit about emoji use at work a couple episodes ago. And it's interesting because I remember a time, and we still are this way, you and I specifically, but I think Frank too. I haven't had as many conversations about emojis with Frank as I have with Jake. Jake and I have.
We talk.
It's exhausting.
Almost constantly.
That is so good.
But I remember a time years ago when we would actually make fun of it. Like,
oh yeah,
somebody, why would you put an emoji in a text message?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's interesting in and of itself, because why did we feel that way? And I think to a certain extent still feel that way. We would not use emojis with each other for sure. At least, I mean, not non-ironically.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I have come to use them regularly with like my girlfriend, for instance. Yep. And actually quite often I like it because, I mean, we have a long distance relationship and all of our communication is virtual.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes you're a little bit talked out. You know what I mean? Because all we can do is talk.
Mm-hmm.
And so emojis, I think, are a quick way for me to tell her I'm thinking about her or whatever. Yeah. Like it's a very easy way. I can send her a kiss or something and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about you."
Mm-hmm.
And we use them a lot. We also use GIFs, which is something that I would have never done that in the past, but
sure.
And she sort of introduced that to me because, again, we're in a long distance relationship. So she would send me a GIF of a man and a woman kissing or something.
Mm-hmm.
And at first it was sort of weird to me, but then I realized over time, she's just trying to say, hey, this is what I would like right now with you. And so anyway, I think it's interesting to talk about emojis in the context of language.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're a good person to bounce stuff off of because of you have a background in linguistics and this sort of thing. So I was thinking about emojis as language specifically, not just emoji use in social media or whatever. So I guess I'll start by asking you: is emoji use are emojis a language?
That's a really interesting question. I like that question.
Maybe.
Can I give you a different question to start with? And you pick the one you like better?
Sure.
Are emojis somewhat different than, would you say, like Egyptian hieroglyphics in language?
I would give the exact same response to both the questions.
Great.
One more. I'm not asking a different question, but one other thing. I know this is a big conversation within linguistics, and I recently heard on what's the podcast?
Lexicon
Valley. This brought up briefly, and I'm just adding to the hieroglyphics question. They mentioned like Chinese or something because they use what we see as symbols.
Sure.
Not necessarily symbols, but to us it looks like they're just using a bunch of symbols to talk. So I'm just going to throw that out there before you start talking.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, when I hear that, the first thing that comes to mind that I would say is that what language is not? Language is not written.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's really hard for Western society to wrap their heads around because we are brought up with written text alongside speech, side by side from the very beginning. But when you actually look at language, it is primarily spoken. That's the way it began. It's been around for, from what we can tell, like 80 to 100,000 years. Written language has only been around for 6 to 10, I believe. So it's really hard for us to get our heads out of this space that says, oh, this word that I'm looking at is an actual word, but it's not.
So define language for me in a as brief a way as possible. Just like, what's a basic, if I needed to explain this to someone else.
Sure. I mean, it's essentially spoken and shared symbol. Like that's what it is. If we agree, you and I, upon the term Bob, and we say that this cup is Bob, then I say Bob, and you know what I'm talking about, right? Mm-hmm. It's as simple as that. Is a shared symbolic verbal system. That said, language is multifaceted. It is going to have a grammar. It's going to have that lexicon, that vocabulary that is shared. It's going to have all those things, but it's also going to have a shared pragmatic system. And that's probably the direction that we'll go whenever we talk about something like emojis, is that, we don't just speak with words, we speak with our bodies.
Sure.
Right? If I were to, give you a thumbs up here, you would say, oh, that means this is good. In other parts of the world, a thumbs up does not mean that. It means something entirely different, right? Or if you see somebody giving you a thumbs up on the side of the road, you don't think, oh, that person says, good job driving. That person wants me to pick them up and give them a ride somewhere, right? It is this sort of contextual thing that we implicitly know, this shared sort of symbol language that, changes. Are you trying to hitchhike right now?
What's it mean right now?
I think you're saying, good job, man. That was great.
That's right.
So, yeah, I mean, if you start by saying that language is not written, then from that basis, you already understand that emojis are, in a way, not a language. They're a part of a language, right?
I asked you, I'm sure you're getting there, but I asked you the other day when we were in the gym working out, I said, are emojis a language? And you said, yeah.
In some form or fashion. We can get there. But basically, the idea that I'm trying to get at is that in and of themselves, they can be used like language in a similar way that LOL or haha in texting can be used, right? These are what linguists call pragmatic particles, and they are ways of giving you context clues to the emotional state or the intended meaning of otherwise arbitrary text, right? That's sort of the way that they're used. That said, we can use emojis in a way that we can't use LOL. If you wanted to text Amy and give her a kiss, like sending LOL out of context means nothing, right? But if you send her that emoji, the little heart lips,
sure,
it means something else because it's actually,
it's got context built in. So
right. It's an avatar of your face across the room, like sending a kissy face, right? So it kind of evokes this idea that text is very much like spoken language, in that we're not writing an essay usually whenever we text, right? If you look at modern text usage, you're going to see sentence fragments. You're going to see a lack of punctuation sometimes. You're going to see a lack of capitalization. These things are not parts of language that you're thinking about when you're speaking out loud. As I'm talking to you right now, am I thinking about the fact that that sentence started with a capital A? Absolutely not. I'm not thinking about where the commas are. Sometimes I might interrupt myself in the middle of a sentence. You don't see that in a book or in academic literature or anything like that. You see this sort of prestigious, well thought out, flowing, drafted, edited sort of prose, whereas text is really bringing us back into the realm of writing like we speak. I think that emojis, in a very similar way, are allowing us to communicate. This is that Snapchat conversation that we were having, right? It's like, how do we communicate in a digital space by recreating what we could do in the same room together?
Yeah.
So in that way, I think, yes, emojis are a shared language, but usually not between more than like two people.
Is this something you had? Did you cover this in school? Did they talk about this specific thing?
Not really. No.
Just out of curiosity. Do you know sort of the origin of emojis?
I mean, I don't.
I don't either.
Sure about it, but
I just googled it out of curiosity, and I don't have enough time to do research to know what's completely accurate. But the modern day emojis, they basically say go back to the early or the mid 90s, like with chat rooms. Of course, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And those were just using colon and parentheses or whatever.
Yeah.
And of course, they have over time gotten broader and better. But
those were originally called emoticons.
Emoticons, yes.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. So we went from like emoticons to emojis, and now we've got like bitmojis.
Right. That's an interesting piece of it too. Is now we're trying to not just show a face, we're trying to show an entire almost personality and identity in like a bitmoji.
The origin of, I'm just reading this from the internet. The origin of emoji can be traced back to Japan, the late 1990s. The word emoji comes from a combination of two Japanese words, e meaning picture and moji meaning character.
And so that's also interesting. I remember listening to a Brave New Work podcast where they were talking about emoji use at work.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I remember them saying that some cultures are way more like cultures like Asian culture, different Asian cultures are, they expect emoji use at a higher rate, even like at work, for instance.
Okay.
It's like more a part of a culture. Do you know anything about that? Is how or why that might be different from culture to culture?
I don't know specifically, like I can't, state any research about it, but I can tell you that, the first thing I think about actually is like tonal languages, right? In Mandarin, for instance, the same word, he, if said he, like these different ascending or descending sorts of tones can mean different words. And oftentimes, like if you just look at the distribution, like you'll find a high correlation of people, like highly skilled musicians with perfect pitch, because they're more in tune with pitch from a young age. It's actually providing utility for them to be focusing and giving awareness to changes in pitch.
Sure.
So in a similar way, I would say that, you are looking at these written grapholects that are symbolic, so in that way, you're probably more used to the written form embodying in some way the word itself, if that makes sense.
Now, going back to Frank's question, are hieroglyphs, is that language or are those images?
So hieroglyphs are interesting.
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt. I know you said that language isn't written, and hieroglyphs, I suppose, would be quote unquote written in some way. But do you see a connection between the two?
Oh, absolutely. I see it in the same way that any character can stand for a unit of meaning, right? For us, you think about the letter A, it stands for a unit of sound. That sound in certain environments stands for a unit of meaning. This is like when I think about language, and I'm digressing a little bit, but it's really interesting. It's a system of systems that build upon each other. We have within us the ability to make sound with our mouth. It's just based on the shape. So if I have my mouth more open and I just vocalize a sound, I'm going to get ah. And as I start to close my mouth, changing the shape of it, I'm going to get oh. So at the back of the throat, I've got ah. And at the very, very front, when those lips are almost closed, I've got ooh. That's a vowel. There's also, all of these consonant sounds where we're actually closing the mouth a little bit. We have voiced and unvoiced variants, which basically means, are my vocal cords engaged or are they not, right? So if this is just the human ability to make sound, the next system up is phonology. How do we turn those sounds into meaning?
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, if we're talking about the word apple, right? You and I would pronounce it apple. The British would pronounce it probably something like apple. And we're changing that sound. A and ah, they're both represented by this symbolic A,
Sure.
but they mean something different, right? Apple is not a word, so I'm going to assume they mean apple, right? But we can actually change the meaning of a word. For instance, if I say pen as opposed to pin, right? These are different things, and all I did was change one sound. So that's phonology. Then we've got morphology, and these are little bits that are like clumped together. So, I can say the word tie. You know what this means? It's the act of, tying laces together or something like that. So tie is in itself a morpheme. It's also a word. I've got another morpheme, un. I can put un right in front of tie, and I put these two units of meaning together, and they mean the opposite of tie, right? So this is what we do. We've got syntax on top of that, which means what order do I put things in a sentence, right? If I say, I untied my laces, it means something different than my laces untied me, right? The order of these things matter.
Sure.
So as we compound all of these systems together, this is actually what is creating this matrix of meaning that all humans over time share. And I realized that, like I said, was a big digression, but when you're thinking about meaning making and symbol sharing, there's a lot going on between us. So it makes sense to me that when we're trying to share something that is necessarily spoken for all of time, you see my face, you see my hands moving, all this stuff, it had to happen in the same room together. When we're sharing it over vast spaces where we can't be together, we're going to try to recreate that because you can actually glean more information than just the words at face value.
So when you put those words on a page, you said language isn't written. I'm trying to understand the sort of how it changes. So if I put a sentence on a page, how is it different from the spoken sentence as far as language goes? Is that?
Can you rephrase it somehow?
Yeah.
Language is written for sure.
Language is, in its primary state, oral. And it is that
historically was.
If we look at the evolutionary arc of language, It has for all of time been oral. And in fact, for you, you were able to speak and understand language as a verbal process prior to being able to read the rest.
Right. Historically.
The written word is a symbol for the spoken language.
Okay.
And is not the language itself. It is a symbol that refers back to the language.
And do you think this can evolve in a way that what you're saying may end up being incorrect?
It's entirely possible that at some point it could evolve to that state if people no longer speak to each other. Or in a situation where, I'm born deaf, for instance, and we're using hand signs to be that language. But what I'm really trying to draw attention to is that for literate societies, when you grow up, it's very hard to think about language as this ephemeral sound that comes out into space and then drops out as soon as I say it. We think of it as this lasting, concrete symbol that you can write down and hand to someone, but that itself is not language.
Right. Well, and the place that I was actually trying to go with this, I think, is I'm trying to understand the difference between the language and the symbol of a language, and maybe what makes those things different, and how emoji use, Bitmoji use, these things that are developing. When you put those on paper or on a computer screen, for instance, might make it closer to language than just the symbol of language. Because now you talk about tone and these things. I think emoji brings us closer to being able to put that on paper. And so I don't know what my question is exactly, but that's my thought process is do emojis bring us closer to language being on a screen?
I would say yes, in every way. And this is sort of what I was getting at with text as well. Is it's like, we have gone from being an oral people. If you look at the transcript for this podcast, you will realize that I just said half of a sentence, interrupted myself, and have probably done that like 3 times in the last 30 seconds, right? This is how people actually communicate. We think about language as, this sort of written, prosaic, well-formulated thing, but that is actually an artifact of literacy more than it is an artifact of spoken language. If you could not put it on a page, you couldn't take this paragraph and say, you know what, I think that would sound better here, right? It allows for this sort of retrospective and editing process. We didn't see things like a detective novel, which really requires you to have point A that is leading us to this big reveal, because you needed to start with the reveal and you had to work your way back. And the brain typically just isn't capable of thinking about this and capturing an audience in that way without, being able to move those things around tactilely. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that, text, we have sort of allowed ourselves to be as lazy as we do when we're speaking. We I mentioned the thing about no punctuation, no capitalization, this sort of thing. Maybe sending, a few words with an LOL afterwards, just sort of these like pragmatic indicators. Oh, that was, I meant that in a funny way. Right. And yes, I think that what we are really attempting to do in this text space is different than what we're trying to do in academic literature. We're trying to recreate the room that we're all sitting in right now, where you're looking over at me and, and I wipe my head and that I'm warm and, like all these things. We're trying to recreate that in a digital space.
Yeah. I don't know. I think emojis do things that you can't even do in a physical space. They can bridge like cultural gaps.
Yeah.
I've worked with developers in the past that I would feel way less able to communicate with if we were to sit in the same room together.
Sure.
Versus some chat, some emojis thrown in to get a clear like they're universally understood.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
In some ways, it's better than this other kind of language you're talking about, and that makes me think it's a language of its own.
Well, this is sort of what I was getting at when Noah said the other day. I said, yes, it is a language. It's a language between you and them that has been agreed upon, and you might use an eggplant and mean eggplant with them. They're like, what are you having for dinner? Eggplant. You used an eggplant with us. We think you meant something different, right? It's a shared sort of thing that could mean something different to different people. But you all have sort of determined this is what these emojis mean.
Well, yes. I mean, eggplant's a little obscure, but everybody pretty much knows what the common ones are: thumbs up and the celebration, and there are cultural differences that are sort of harder to bridge than just a really smiley guy with a thumbs up or whatever. It's like, it seems happy. You liked what I did. That's good.
It reminds me of, and Noah and I were talking about this not so long ago, that it's sort of an ad hoc language, which happens. For instance, often in colonial situations or like in the slave trade, you would have a lot of people in one place that might be from several different countries that spoke different languages. And what would often happen in these places is you would get what's called a pidgin developing. A pidgin language is essentially a language that is almost always started from trade. Different people interacting. I need that fish that you're selling. I have this ceramic. Let's trade. We have to be able to develop some sort of really, tiny language to do that. Usually what happens is you've got one language called the lexifying language, which is where you get all your words, and another language that provides the sentence structure or that syntax. What order do we put them in? And then you take a few of these words, you throw them into there, and we're both creating this language together. And sometimes those languages actually stick around long enough to become real and in use. There's a Hawaiian pidgin that has just become like a national language at this point. And at that point, they're called Creoles, and they're actually solidified in time. That reminds me a lot of what you're talking about here with emoji use. It's like, hey, we're using this language for a time and space. I'm not going to pass this generationally to my kids. I'm not going to say, hey, this emoji means this when you're talking to these people. But it absolutely does bridge otherwise sort of chasmic gaps.
Yeah, and also, and not even like major cultural differences, just personality differences. If I'm talking to an Enneagram 2 or a 4, I use emojis because there's no risk. There's like so much less risk that they will misunderstand what I mean.
Interesting.
So I just always use emojis. They're concise, they're clear. If I don't use an emoji, there's a chance that they think I'm mad at them or something. Not just these specific types, but they're the most common misunderstood by me, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Then I have a whole phone conversation. Maybe that's 45 minutes long. And then at the end, they feel better. And they don't have that. But I could have just put a little smiley guy at the end of the sentence, and they would have known I love them.
Mm-hmm.
Why not just do it?
Right.
That is language.
Absolutely. That it is replicating what you would have done in the same room with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, except I'm probably better in the written word at it.
Potentially. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But anyway, I mean, that's sort of what I mean by the hieroglyph question. It's like, is an emoji and a hieroglyph, the same thing? Yeah, they're pictorial representations of some symbol. The symbol still has to be shared, though.
Mm-hmm.
And it primarily is. There was actually this study that was done a while back that looked at, we talked about body language, but facial expression, and they broke this down. They did this cross culturally, and they had these cameras like look at the micro expressions of people. And they determined these different areas of the face. So you've got brow furrowing, eyebrow movement, nose twitching. You've got different shapes of the mouth, obviously, and even shapes of the eyes, how much they're open, closed, this type of thing. And they determined something like hundreds of combinations that the face can be in. And then they found these universal constants across every single culture that they studied. And these constants were things like pain, disgust, anger, sadness. Across cultures, these all look the same. And I think that in that way, that emoji really is communicating something that is beyond this oral language.
Definitely.
And it's just human.
Did you ever watch Lie to Me?
Yes.
I love that show.
That was great.
It was all about, I don't even know what
micro expressions.
It was about micro expressions, but I don't know what, like he basically was a lie detector, and he studied micro expressions to determine if somebody, so like investigating for like law enforcement or whatever. But it was super interesting. I mean, it was a TV show, but it was still really interesting.
Yeah.
And you can learn a lot from it. I mean, supposing that it's accurate, but it was very interesting. Yeah, the micro expression stuff is great.
Yeah, I mean, I said that language is, in its primary state oral, but there are obviously these other aspects or dimensions to language, like body language. And if I could take it back, I would say, yeah, I mean, the baby looking up at its mother's face while it's feeding is probably receiving communication, and she's receiving communication from it far before words mean anything at all. Yeah, there's this universal constant that it's obviously missing in the written word. So being able to add it back is making it more like the real world.
Yeah, I mean, I use emojis. Essentially, if I don't have a firm foundation relationship with someone, even in business, I use emojis.
Mm-hmm.
They just reduce the risk, and it's a waste of time and energy on my part to increase the risk that someone's going to misunderstand what I mean.
Isn't that interesting? Because not so long ago, I felt like the use of emoji was the most unprofessional thing you could do. And then
I remember being
in.
on the leading edge of that. I had people say, please don't do that. And I said, no, it's just not worth it. Like, I prefer to do it. So
yeah,
if it's something you need to fire me for, I understand. But our customers really like me because I am clear in my communication. So, balance the force.
Right.
But I know there are people who hate it, for sure. I don't, if they make a comment, I'll probably stop. Like, if the recipient is like that, why'd you put a smiley face on there? I'll probably stop. But
sure, it's sort of person specific or audience specific.
Yeah. I mean, I especially learned like the people who emotions mean a lot to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're really, how they feel is important. A lot of people aren't that way, and a lot of people are. So if I know that it's important, I'm like, I'm going to spend more energy on that part of the message.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just want to create an environment people want to work, where they love what they're doing, and if they hate it, then they're never going to do it. So
this is, totally different. I guess it's almost workplace culture related, but it's like, I don't know if I personally have gone through this evolution, or if work culture in general is sort of going through this evolution, or maybe it's both. But I remember, in some of my first jobs, it felt so prescriptive. You have to dress this way, despite the fact that you would never dress this way any other time. You have to speak a certain way in your emails. You have to do it. You have to be something other than what you typically are. And obviously, there's still some of that. You have to conduct yourself, different in different audiences. But I do feel a lot more of what you're talking about, which is, hey guys, I have this crazy idea. If we all just got to have fun and like feel motivated based on, what motivates us individually, we would probably produce more and better things.
Yeah.
I see that a lot more. And it's like, why wouldn't you use emojis? I mean, the emoji, like at face value, is not offensive, right? I guess I understand that it looks different than academic writing in the prestige dialect or whatever. It looks more like texting, which we feel is somehow, a devolved form of good, high quality language. But if we can actually appreciate the fact that texting looks far more like the conversation you're going to have across the boardroom table, face to face, it actually seems to me that texting, emoji use, whatever we're doing in that sort of familiar environment is actually what we've been doing trade with for all of our lives, the life of society, and closer to what we're doing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like a bad thing. I do think it's funny though, like just to take it somewhere else. You said this and you meant it in a different way, but you said you can do things with emojis that you can't even do in regular life, right? And you were talking about talking to somebody who speaks a different language than you, but you recently discovered the Bitmojis in Snapchat, and you and I were sending these ridiculous, stupid things, back and forth to each other, where we're lounging in a bowl of ramen like it's a hot tub or something, and it's interesting to me that art tends to go from realistic, think Rembrandt and the Renaissance, and trying to replicate realism as much as possible. Some new technology comes in. Oh, we've got the photograph now. We don't need painters to do that. We can just click a button and we've got your exact likeness. Painters, you guys don't do something else. So painters go, like Dali, and they're like, all right, well, I want to paint horses with 2-story long legs and make pots bend like soup. And I see the same sort of progression here. It's like the Bitmoji is trying to recreate emotion and context in a digital space, but then all of a sudden they're like, well, we could do crazy stuff too, like take us all to outer space and put an octopus on Jake's head.
And Snap is like actually leading. Like, I'm very impressed. I don't open that app that much, but each time I do, they're getting smarter and better AI on the conversations, so that it literally is generating, I don't know about better, but very good, complex emotional responses to the context of the conversation. So you can take whichever, there's 3 choices there on which way you want to take it. And they're very human. They feel really human.
I agree with that. Noah, you don't have this experience. I don't think they had this when you were on Snapchat, and you probably weren't using it this way. But like, if I type something to Frank that says, "Hey, I'm excited to get going this morning," it's going to show me like 3 pictures at the bottom of a little Jake-looking thing that he could be like saying, "Hey."
No, it was doing that several years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, or you like, let's go on a run. It's me and Jake running a race or something.
Yeah, you're right though. Like it's getting very intelligent about what it gives you, and obviously this is probably just based on the way users use it.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, most people when somebody typed lawnmower used this emoji, with it, so it starts to create these very interesting, like tangential relationships between emojis. I've noticed. I don't have an example right this second, but it's like, that's so weird that popped up, but it's kind of exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, well, they're building neural nets of you, but of general language. And I don't know if those images are truly like random. I don't think they're at that level yet, but I think they'll get there where you can say, do you want to, I don't know, go canoeing on a lake? It generates you two in a canoe on a lake.
Sure.
And it uses the weather of your location. And I don't think they're at that level, but I think they'll get there because just the trajectory they're on. So
absolutely. Yeah, I don't see why not.
And then, but you can't do like, it would require so many words or so much back and forth communication to communicate how nice it is outside and that we should go canoeing and do you want to go, and then put this picture in your head, or I can just, and you're like, that does look really good. Let's do it.
Sure. That's a good point, actually. That's funny because, we had this conversation about how Snapchat feels the most human, and we decided that meant it allows me to interact with a person who's far away from me the most similarly to the way I would interact with them in person. And taking this idea of like moving from realism to surrealism, what Snapchat has also done is give us new reasons and ways to interact. Like, I can't tell you how many times my son has been like, hey, Daddy, can we do filters on Snapchat? And we just sit on the couch together and make funny faces. And like, we're doing that together because of this surreal opportunity. Or you can do that, if you and I were in different houses and use those filters, we could send them to each other. It's a reason to interact.
Yeah. Well, and there's a reason, you probably haven't considered it, that you're French fries right now.
Yeah.
It's sort of fun.
It is fun. Hey guys, I am French fries. I can see posting this video. I know.
I think we should end the podcast. Does anybody have any last thoughts before we do that?
I like French fries.
I don't really like French fries.
Really?
No?
Not a fan of French fries anymore, mostly because they're fried.
Yeah, no consensus on French fries, unfortunately.
Cool.
Dragon out.
Robot out.
See you later.
Hey, it's Frank again. Thanks for listening to an Origins episode of the Unbecoming Platypus podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. You can also check us out online at theunbecomingplatypus.com. We hope these conversations inspire you to improve your communication skills and deepen your connections with your own friends and loved ones. Until next time, this has been the Unbecoming Platypus podcast.